Okay, so Star Wars. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the movie and try and explain what's at stake externally, what's at stake internally, and what's at stake philosophically. Okay, so external stakes. So you're introducing the external stakes of your story in the inciting incident of the story, and you're introducing sort of the global problem that Luke is going to have to try and solve at the climax of the story. So here's the scene in Star Wars that introduces the external stakes of the story.
I have placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of this R2 unit. My father will know how to retrieve it. You must see this droid safely delivered to him on Alderaan.
So it's the survival of the rebellion. That's what's externally at stake in Star Wars. The rebellion is either going to prosper and survive, or it's going to be wiped out completely. Now, a lot of times what you do in your story, when you're trying to introduce the philosophical stakes of your story, is that you have the bad guy, your antagonist, come in, and he sort of says to the hero, kid, let me tell you the way the world works. And he lays out the dominant set of values for this whole universe. And I like to call this the antagonist aria. So here's the antagonist aria of Star Wars. It happens right at the end of Act 1. It's Peter Cushing telling you how the world works in Star Wars.
The rebellion will continue to gain a support in the Imperial Senate.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I have just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
That's impossible. How will the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy?
The regional governors now have direct control over their territories. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
So fear. Peter Cushing is saying, we are going to rule through fear, through coercion. We're an empire. And then you have the underdog values of the story. And a lot of times what you're doing is, just like you have the bad guy, the antagonist come in and say, here's the way I think the world works. The hero also meets a mentor, and the mentor is the one who speaks to the underdog values of the story. And the mentor will give a speech to say, kid, I know everybody else thinks this, but really things are like this. So here is the mentor's speech in Star Wars.
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help. I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
I can't get involved. I've got work to do. It's not that I like the Empire. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. It's such a long way from here.
That's your uncle talking.
So Obi-Wan is saying, I need your help, she needs your help. He's saying that the way we should get along in the world is not through empire, is not through domination, is not through fear, but it's through democracy, through cooperation, through helping each other. So we all get this, right? It's the empire versus republic. It's fear versus the consent of the governed. It's violence versus cooperation. It's tyranny versus freedom. It's basically good guys versus bad guys. And that's all set up in the first act of the story. Now, what you're also doing is you're not just establishing what's philosophically at stake in the global world, but you're also establishing what's philosophically at stake in the personal realm. So here is a speech in Star Wars in which Alec Guinness, playing Obi-Wan, talks to Luke about what the underdog values of the story are personally.
The Force?
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
What Obi-Wan is saying here is that we are all connected to each other. We're all united. The Force is something that all unites us all. So here's the philosophical antagonist of Star Wars telling Luke the way the world works through his eyes.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
So what Han is saying here is there's no Force, there's no commonality, we're not connected to each other, we're all alone in this universe. So in the drama of the philosophical stakes of your story, you're setting up the dominant values at the beginning in Act 1 with the antagonist aria, in which he says to your hero, here's the way the world works. And then what happens usually in Act 3 is you have your hero's closest ally come to him and philosophically betray your hero. Again, what I call the Judas moment of betrayal, because the hero's ally is going to choose the dominant values of the universe and reject the underdog values of the universe. And then for the underdog values, you have your mentor give a speech in Act 1 and say, kid, there's another way to see the world. There's another way of living your life. And then you get to Act 3 and you'll have the mentor return. the mentor is going to come back and whisper in the ear of your hero and remind him of the underdog values that they talked about in the first act of the story.
Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke.
The Force is strong in this one.
Luke, trust me.
His computer's off. Luke, you switched off your targeting computer. What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm all right.
So what's philosophically at stake in Star Wars is this notion of, are we connected to each other? You know, do we share this sort of universal kinship, or are we all just disconnected and it's every man for himself? And that bleeds out to a larger set of values, right? Do we choose to live our lives according to the ideas, the tenets of altruism and community and selflessness, or do we pursue a path of sort of self-interest, individualism, and selfishness? So here's the philosophical stakes of Star Wars, right? On the global level, it's about empire and dominance versus democracy and cooperation. On a personal level, it's sort of about greed and selfishness versus duty and altruism. Now let's go to the internal stakes of Star Wars, what's emotionally at stake at Star Wars. With Star Wars, it was a little trickier, and I had to go back and watch the film a couple of times because I was thinking, well, is it a romance with Princess Leia? But obviously that's not really going to be it. And then I was also thinking, well, maybe, Luke is trying to find a father figure in Obi-Wan. Maybe that's what he's searching for. But then, Obi-Wan gets killed sort of at the end of the second act. And so I couldn't figure out sort of what the emotional stakes of Star Wars were. And I had to go back and watch the movie a couple of times. And I finally found a moment where I felt like it sort of like brought everything to a head. So here is the scene in which you're setting up what's emotionally at stake in Star Wars.
Your only concern is to prepare those new droids for tomorrow. In the morning, I want them up there on the South Ridge working on those condensers.
Yes. I think those new droids are going to work out fine. In fact, I also thinking about our agreement, about me staying on another season. And if these new droids do work out, I want to transmit my application to the Academy this year.
You mean the next semester before the harvest?
Sure, there's more than enough droids.
Harvest is when I need you the most. It's only one season more. This year we'll make enough on the harvest that I'll be able to hire some more hands, and then you can go to the Academy next year. You must understand I need you here, Luke.
But it's a whole nother year.
Look, it's only one more season.
Yeah, that's what she said when Biggs and Tank left.
Where are you going?
Looks like I'm going nowhere. I have to go finish cleaning those droids.
Oh, and he can't stay here forever. Most of his friends have gone. It means so much to him.
I'll make it up to him next year. I promise.
Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him.
That's what I'm afraid of.
You kind of expect him to start singing Over the Rainbow at that moment, looking at those two suns. But the argument I'm going to make here is that what's emotionally at stake in Star Wars is Luke's sense of being called to a greater destiny. It's the call to greatness. And this is something I think we can all relate to, right? Because we've all felt that way, right? We've all felt like we're just like a small town kid in a small town world, and somewhere out there, there's something bigger, more exciting happening. There's like a greater destiny out there. And the drama of our lives is like, are we going to be able to go out there and reach it? Are we going to be able to go out and fulfill it? Like, are we even going to get a chance to go out there and see the world and have adventures and fulfill our full potential? So just as you have an antagonist and a mentor in your external stakes, you also have an antagonist and a mentor in your internal set of stakes. So the bad guy emotionally in Star Wars is actually Uncle Owen. He's the guy who's looking at Luke and saying, hey, don't get too big for bridges, kid. You're just a small town kid in a small town world. Your only job is to make sure those condensers are working tomorrow. Don't get any big dreams. You're not that special. And then the opposite of that is Obi-Wan. And he's the guy, the mentor, who looks at you and says, kid, I see something special in you. I think you have the seeds of greatness inside you. Okay, so 3 sets of stakes in Star Wars. Externally, it's the survival of the rebellion. Internally, it's Luke's call to greatness. And philosophically, it's this question of, do you live your life according to the values of selfishness or according to the values of altruism? And in each set of stakes, you have a bad guy, right? So externally, it's Darth Vader who's trying to crush the rebellion. internally, it's Uncle Owen who's saying, kid, you're not that special. And philosophically, it's going to be Han Solo saying, hey, it's smarter to be selfish and self-interested than to help anybody. And what I'm going to do next is just talk about how each set of stakes has its own story arc to it. It has its own inciting incident, its own first act break, etc. So here's the arc of the external stakes in Star Wars, which is you begin on page 1, and on page 10, you have your inciting incident. You're establishing that the survival of the rebellion is at stake. On page 25, you're giving Luke a goal, which is to deliver the plans that are inside R2-D2, right, to Princess Leia's father on Alderaan. Now, if you're a bad screenwriter, that would be the second act for the rest of your story, just watching Luke try to get R2-D2 to Alderaan. But Lucas does something super, super smart here in terms of storytelling, which is he has a Death Star show up and just blow up Alderaan, right? So now you know that Luke and Obi-Wan are heading towards a planet that doesn't exist anymore. So that's a great little thing to happen at the beginning of your second act, right? Your hero has a plan, they're heading towards that plan, and then something comes along and disrupts that plan. So you get to page 50, and they come out of hyperspace, and oh my God, Alderaan's gone, and there's a tractor beam, and they get sucked into the Death Star. So that's sort of this midpoint reversal of the story. But then as soon as you get into the Death Star, right, you have a new goal. You go, oh my God, she's here, we've got to go rescue the princess. So you're spending the third quarter of the film going out, finding the princess, and rescuing her. And then you get to the second act, and you rescue the princess, you escape from the Death Star, and it seems like you've achieved your goals, right? You've taken R2-D2, you don't go to Alderaan, but you find Princess Leia's father, and you deliver the plan. And so it seems as though you've achieved your second act goal. However, this is the genius thing, so at the same time you're delivering the plans to the Death Star to Princess Leia's father and the rebels, you're inadvertently revealing the location of the rebels' base, and that's forcing the stakes of your story, right? Because now the Death Star is on its way. Now the Death Star is coming. So now either the Death Star is going to survive or the rebels are going to survive, but they both can't survive at the same time. You get to your climax, you blow up the Death Star, you save the rebellion, and you have your ending. Now you have a similar arc in the internal story of Star Wars, the emotional story. It begins on page 1, and you already have Luke planning to leave the farm, go off, join the Space Academy. So the inciting incident is actually when he sits down with his aunt and uncle and asks to go to Space Academy, and he gets turned down. And now his future has changed, and he feels diminished somehow. He feels like he's maybe not that special. However, just a few pages later, right, he meets Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan leads and goes, you must learn the ways of the Force. And Obi-Wan is saying, like, I believe in you, kid. I think you got something special inside you. So when you get to page 25, right, the end of the first act, Uncle Owen gets killed, and now Luke is free to leave home and pursue his greater destiny.
I want to come with you to Alderaan. There's nothing for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
You get to your midpoint, and Obi-Wan is training Luke to use the Force, right? And when Luke is actually able to connect and use the Force, he dodges that droid, and Obi-Wan turns to him and says, you've taken your first step into a much larger world. And what that's doing is affirming Luke's sense that maybe he is special. Maybe he does have something inside him, like maybe he is destined for greatness somehow. So then on page 75, at the end of the second act, you have this enormous setback in the emotional stakes of your story because Obi-Wan gets killed by Darth Vader, and you suddenly think, oh my God, maybe Uncle Owen was right. Maybe Obi-Wan was just a crazy old man. And then you get to your climax on page 90, and that's when Obi-Wan returns, and he whispers in Luke's ear, and he says, remember, trust your feelings, use the Force. So Luke is able to blow up the Death Star, and Obi-Wan comes back and says, remember, the Force will be with you always. And that's the resolution of the emotional stakes of Star Wars. So there's a similar arc in the philosophical stakes of the story. You meet Luke on page 1, and he's sort of sympathetic to the rebellion, but he's not doing anything about it. He's sitting around, and he says, it's not like I like the Empire, I hate it, but there's nothing I can do. And Uncle Owen is the guy who's sort of stoking that at the same time. He's saying, your only job is to prepare those new droids for tomorrow morning. The inciting incident, then, philosophically, is meeting Obi-Wan and having Obi-Wan say, I need your help, she needs your help. And Obi-Wan is introducing this new set of possibilities that you can live your life according to the values of altruism. So on page 25, Uncle Owen dies, and now Luke sets off. He says, I'm committed to this underdog set of values. I'm committed to helping Obi-Wan and trying to help Princess Leia. Now you get to the midpoint, and you meet Han Solo, and he's the philosophical antagonist of the story. He's the guy who says, I don't believe in the Force. I don't believe in any sort of universal connection. And he also says, I take orders from one guy, me. So you're meeting a guy who doesn't believe in the values that Obi-Wan has been preaching to Luke. You meet a guy who's sort of disdainful of those values and saying, listen, kid, that's not the way the world works at all. So now you get to page 75, and again you have this huge setback at the end of the second act. Obi-Wan dies, and then a few pages later, Han Solo flees the rebel base, and that's the Judas moment of betrayal. That's the moment in which your hero's closest ally sort of turns his back on the hero, turns his back on the good values of the story, the underdog values, and chooses to embrace the dominant values of the story. And then you have the climax of the story in which the mentor comes back, and he sort of whispers in the hero's ear and he says, remember those good values that we talked about? Remember our sense of connectedness? Remember helping people? Like, you've got to commit to those values. And then you have a moment a few minutes later where Han Solo comes back, right, and he embraces the values of teamwork. He embraces the values of duty and sacrifice, and he shoots Darth Vader off Luke's tail. And it's a combination of those two things. It's a combination of Luke remembering what Obi-Wan said and Han Solo coming back, embracing the values of altruism that allows Luke to finally shoot the bullseye and blow up the Death Star. And then you have your ending where the good values have prevailed over the bad values. The underdog values have prevailed over the dominant values. Democracy, freedom, connection, altruism has all prevailed over empire, violence, and greed. So I'm going to show you the second act break reversal of Star Wars. It's one of the best second act break reversals of all time, I think, in the movies. It's the moment in which your hero has achieved a second act goal, but now he's inadvertently forcing the stakes of the global goal. Here it is.
That's it! We did it!
We did it!
Help! I think I'm melting. This is all your fault.
Are they away?
They've just made the jump into hyperspace.
You're sure the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship? I'm taking an awful risk, Vader. This had better work.
So you get to page 75 and you escape from the Death Star. You know, you take R2-D2, you take the plans and you deliver it to the Rebel base, you know, and it seems as though you've achieved your second act goal. However, one page later, you got to reveal that the location of the Rebel base has inadvertently been revealed, you know, and that's this huge, huge setback in the external stakes of the story. And then one page later, Han Solo sort of flees and says, you know, I ain't sticking around here, and that's a huge setback in the philosophical stakes of the story. And then even a few pages before that, you had Obi-Wan killed, and that's the worst possible thing in terms of the internal stakes of the story. So for the third act of your story, you're going from page 75, the second act break, to page 90. And what ideally you want there is to have nothing going right for your hero. You just want one thing after another going wrong in all three sets of stakes, externally, internally, and philosophically. So in Star Wars, right, you have Obi-Wan gets killed, right? That's a huge setback emotionally in the internal stakes. You have the Death Star locate the Rebel base. That's a huge setback externally in the external stakes. And you have Han Solo abandon Luke, which is this big, big setback, your Judas moment of betrayal in the philosophical stakes of your story. And then you have the Rebel fighters take off and they all get killed by Darth Vader. And then you have R2-D2 get shot by Darth Vader, and then you have the Death Star clearing the planet, and you have the Rebel base targeted, and then you have Peter Cushing saying commence primary ignition, and then you have Darth Vader get onto Luke's tail, and he's chasing Luke, and he's chasing Luke, and he finally locks on Luke, and that's what I call the moment of despair, because we've just seen Darth Vader kill everybody else that he locked onto like that. We've just seen Darth Vader, you know, one by one pick off all of Luke's friends, all of Luke's allies, and now Darth Vader's chasing Luke, he locks onto him, and he says, I have you now. And that's an external failure, right? Because Luke's about to get killed and the Rebel base is about to be destroyed. It's an internal failure, right? Because you're saying Uncle Owen was right. Like, Luke is going to die just like his father did. He will have failed to achieve any kind of great destiny. But you also have a philosophical failure at this moment, because at this moment, it feels like Han Solo was right. You know, he was smart to just leave the Rebel base and take off and be self-interested and not try to help anybody else out. So it seems at this moment as though selfishness was smarter than altruism. Self-interest was smarter than loyalty. Tyranny is going to triumph over democracy. Greed is better than self-sacrifice. Violence is going to triumph over cooperation. So you have a total failure. Luke has failed externally, he's failed internally, he's failed philosophically, and at this moment, it seems like there's no positive outcome possible.
Okay, and this is really, really important if you want to have a happy ending, because you want your audience to feel as though your hero has earned their happy ending. They need to have gone to the end of their ability and still fallen short.
And the more you can convince your audience that there's no way out, the more that you can convince your audience that everything is lost, the happier they're going to be when you're able to flip everything from failure to success and have a positive outcome. So how do you do that? How do you get from total failure to total success? It comes from the decisive act.
So the decisive act in Star Wars is Han Solo returns and he shoots Darth Vader, and that's the thing that allows Luke to shoot his bullseye and blow up the Death Star.
I have you now. What?
Yahoo! Look out!
And what's crucial here, again, is that your decisive act is an enactment of the underdog values of the story.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Here's where it all comes together at the end. You have your moment of despair. Darth Vader locks on Luke, says, I have you now, and then ba-boom, Han Solo returns, shoots Darth Vader off Luke's tail. That's overturning the philosophical stakes of your story from negative to positive. And because that happens, Luke is able to shoot a bullseye. He blows up the Death Star. You're overturning the external stakes of your story from negative to positive. And because that happens, Obi-Wan comes back and says, remember, the Force will be with you always, and you're overturning the internal emotional stakes of the story from negative to positive. It happens in 42 seconds, and that is an insanely great ending. So let's go back and watch those last 2 minutes of Star Wars, and we'll just play them through, but you'll see how each of these moments play out, from the kamikaze moment of commitment to the moment of despair and to the decisive act. So here it is, the 2-minute climax of Star Wars.
Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke.
The Force is strong in this one.
Luke, trust me.
His computer's off. Luke, you switched off your targeting computer. What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm all right.
I lost R2.
The Death Star has cleared the planet. The Death Star has cleared the planet.
Rebel base in range.
You may fire when ready.
Commence primary ignition. Have you not? What?
Yahoo!
Look out!
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home. Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Okay, so the general point here is that for an insanely great ending, you don't have just one climax to your story, right? You have 3 climaxes: external, internal, and philosophical. And you want them all to be logically connected in as close proximity to each other as possible, and also in ascending order of importance. Ideally, you want to go from total failure to total success in 45 seconds or less. And this is like the hardest thing in the world to do in terms of storytelling, but if you can convincingly pull it off, you got yourself an insanely great ending, okay? So now, The Graduate.